Алина, у тебя отключен звук.
Alina, you are muted. Yes, I keep forgetting this. So, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the fourth and final meeting in the Cultural Mediation series. My name is Alina Belishkina. I am the curator of this series and will be moderating this meeting. And I am joined by my colleagues Daria Malikova and Marina Romanova, representing the Ural Biennial of Contemporary Art and the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art. They are co-organizers of the whole cycle. Daria, Marina, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. During this last month, we have been meeting once a week to discuss art mediation, and the starting point, the impetus for these seminars, for this special space for collective thinking, was the Russian translation of the book Time for Cultural Mediation that was originally published in Switzerland by a collective of authors led by Carmen Merge. I'm not going to reiterate again that the Russian book is still in print, but we believe that it's important to begin talking about mediation in art even today. I am sure that in parallel with us, others are discussing mediation in Russia, and of course this dialogue will continue running when we're done. In this particular case, we used this book as a starting point because we thought that this book influenced Russian culture a lot, but this influence has not been reflected upon. The general idea of mediation and who does mediation is still not crystallized in Russia. But at the same time, both terms are unconsciously clear for those who are really doing this or meeting art mediation in their practice. And personally, I believed that it is interesting to look at how this unconscious understanding arose, why, in which conditions. And I believe that in this process of formation of unconscious knowledge of cultural mediation, the existing practices played the crucial role. We're trying to analyze our preformed ways of knowing and thinking, and maybe learn something new, understand something in a new way. And in this regard, with this vision, we decided to use the subjects in the Time for Cultural Mediation and describe them one by one and localize them in our own environment. And in this process of analysis and self-analysis, we had several guides: Daria Bocharnikova, Bernadette Settle, Charlotte Labar, Alexei Boyko, and others. And today our guide is Gila Kolb. And we are continuing the subject that we took up last Wednesday, who does art mediation. And today we have a practice seminar that also serves as a kind of a summary. That means that we will be discussing not just the particular question of who does mediation, but also discussing other questions that we rose during this month. And when it comes to our agenda, it looks more like a workshop. And that's why I've got a couple of words to say about our agenda today and the plan. So Gila will take the floor first and tell a little bit about her practice and experience, and then we'll have the actual workshop. She will also introduce it and give us all the necessary instructions. The workshop will feature several parts. Gila will tell us about it. And we're not going to say goodbye to each other when it's done. Daria, Maria, and me will give a short summary or a preliminary summary of the whole cycle of meetings. I'm saying preliminary because we're expecting new meetings in the future when we will be rethinking, unthinking, and reconsidering everything that we have learned. That's the plan. If you've got any questions, please use the chat to ask them. And now I'm happy to give the floor to Gila and introduce her. Gila Kolb is our guest today. I'm really happy to see her here. It's an honor to work with her again. Gila is an art mediator, an educator, a researcher, a professor at the Schwyz University. She has also taught in Bern, in the Bremen University, in other art schools. She's the co-founder of the Kassel Art Education Agency. She's the co-founder of the blog The Art Educators Talk, and we're going to use it as part of our workshop. Gila is the author of several publications and papers on education and mediation, and she mainly works with issues of digitization and sustainability in education environment and anti-racist mediation practices. And now, Gila, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Alina Belishkina, for inviting me, and also yeah, I'm really happy and excited to do this practice-based workshop or seminar with you. Yeah, I'm really happy about the whole project and the opportunity to talk about art mediation, to connect with you, and to do a collective interview with you. There's a huge thanks I want to say first for the Ural Industrial Biennial of Contemporary Art, along with Garage and Pro Helvetia, who makes this possible. So I will share my screen with you because I have a presentation, and with the presentation along comes a translation, and I will introduce you to that translation tool as well, which you can later on work with. And if the written translations are not correct, this is totally on me. That is really important to say. So who does art mediations? Some insights from my experience. From 2008 and 2011, I worked as a freelance art educator at the Kunsthalle Fridericianum. Since then, I live in Kassel and follow and move discussions about art education, its conditions, and actors also from a local perspective. From 2016 to 17, I was a member of the 10-person faculty of the Education department of Documenta 14 from 2016 to 2017. In preparation for Documenta 14, I gave workshops for art educators, which dealt with questions and tools for learning and communicating contemporary art. So what happened there was, quote, why do we as art mediators always have to fight for the same topics and conditions with the institutions, end of quote. This question, posed during a workshop on art education at Documenta 14, and certainly not for the first time there, was at the beginning of my research and another reason for my practice of doing the Art Educators Talk, which is an interview blog, and will lead to our collective interview. Because if art mediators are repeatedly working together about shared topics and conditions, then a first step would be for them to be able to negotiate these topics with each other and with the public. And I think this is important. So let's go in. I wonder what happened now in some practices, and I will just show you shortly some examples of the workshop I did together with Claire Butcher in advance of Documenta 14, which was an exhibition that happened in 2017. About Documenta, this is an exhibition which takes place part every 5 years, and it only takes 100 days. Artistic positions. There were around 119,000 persons who took part on a walk, which was a 2-hour art mediation. And the whole Documenta exhibition, this is now my interpretation, was about unlearning. So there were quite some difficult positions to be seen politically, post-colonial, critical, and anti-fascist positions. So it was totally not an easy position for the educators. And how to prepare for that? For that, Claire, Batch, and I decided to start with something that comes from our back pockets. And since the art mediators of Documenta 14 were called chorus or core, I found a little book called Chorus Knowledge for Back Pockets. And I thought, how good is this? Because this would be so nice if we could have all the knowledge we need as art mediators in just a small book and put it in our pockets. But at the same time, this image, I like this image a lot because we already have something in our back pockets. And it's also important to work with this. So let's go into that, how this went. Since it was a chorus, we also started to have a little theater play. And we started with raising questions. Then we discussed what a chorus is and can be, and had some practices as well. I just start with the practice raising questions. So this was that we started with the question, what is your question, or what are your questions in the moment? And in a short speed dating, the art educators or mediators were sharing their questions and ideas, and also their maybe uncertainties they had, and then later on wrote it on a sheet of paper, and were putting it just on the wall. And the important thing for me was that there were questions raised that sometimes people would not feel easy to ask in a group, because sometimes when you ask a question, there's a certain kind of reluctance to it. So first of all, we had this. Then after discussion about the chorus, this is something I wanted to highlight, is something we developed as a tool or exercise, which is called a leaderless walk. And I show you this in a description, which we were also developing within the workshop. And so the idea was that the group was walking together, and that every participant at one point led the group, but the whole group did not talk. So they used their body language to tell the group that they wanted them to follow, or that they were stopping here. So there's another language that we already have in our back pockets, and we sometimes just need to think about it, or maybe to not forget that we already have these kind of tools with us. So this is one example. Another example was that on the Sunday we discussed the question, what's in your pocket? I already told you that I think we have a lot in our pockets already. And so we really started to bring objects that help mediate. And they are really different objects that people brought. Some said, as in this description on the left hand, it is a smartphone that is helping me. Others were bringing books, or sometimes I remember that one person was bringing her shoe, because standing in a really good shoe is also helping you mediate at one point of work. I'm sure you can refer to that relate to that as well. Within this tool, there was another important part of it. So first of all, we checked what we have in our pockets. And then we decided to test these things. So do these tools also work for other people? And within this tooling moment, there was one thing that really impressed me, that did not derive from the workshop, but was already there and somehow went on. And this is a tool that was focusing on working conditions. So how, as an art mediator, can you address the question of working conditions without bringing it up yourself while talking? So this pocket was developed, which says, feel free to ask me about my working conditions. And it was developed by a collective called the Doc 14 Workers. Something that is also really important is also having books at hand, and also to have resources. So this was the collection of books we were working with. So this was the background when I started a study because, or my research on mediation practice. And there were 10 art mediators and who were, who participated in that study. And I worked together with Mara Rieser and Carina Herring, two really amazing researchers, who were walking with the art educators and taking notes. And here you can see one image, which is really just an example image of an art mediator working. And as you can already see, there's something happening with the hands, with gestures, with explanations, and also with the tools that she's having with her. And I'm sure you also know the rules of museums and pockets. So I'm not sure if this pockets would fit in your institutional rules. What I learned from this study, which was about 20 art education of walks or art mediations and 10 interviews, and there were transcriptions with 622 pages. So I will share some insights with you. First, there are first phrases. This is something that was something we already had a little bit in mind, but it is really something to focus on. How do art mediators welcome the group? How do they start with their with connecting with the public? So do they start right away with the conception of the exhibition? Or do they ask, how are you? Or do they ask, what do you expect? Or sometimes do they just say hello and please put your things here and we start now? Which is also, I think these are all examples and they can lead into very different directions and they are setting a ground. So this can be one thing that can be also helpful for you to think about. The second thing I wanted to share with you is a dilemma of knowledge. And this is something that occurred a lot in Documenta 14, because there was an expectation of Documenta 14 curatorial team that the public should rather develop and discuss topics instead of the art mediators talking to them and the public listening. But then, on the other hand, what do you do if there are really complex artworks that just need explanation? And there was one dealing with, or one particular art educator I wanted to highlight, which is Anne-Kathrin Morgan, and she wrote about her experiences between these two expectations. And she noted that this form of asking questions, so for example, what do you think about this artwork, sometimes led to the situation that people who are used to talk about it, which she noted were mostly white male persons, sometimes elderly white male persons, they were talking and the others weren't. And so at that point, she decided, because she wanted to have a conversation for everyone, she rather decided to not have a conversation for everyone, but instead of giving an input so that everyone has the opportunity to then talk about it. So this is the second one. And the first one is, so for the second one, it's just, sometimes it's also good to have a dialogue and sometimes it's also good to have an input. That's the finding. Number 3 is that art mediation is work. And this also relates to the pocket I already showed. Some mediators at Documenta 14 decided for some strategies to make their working conditions a topic. The problem was, for example, for them, that they were not really paid well if they were freelancers. But on the other hand, there were students who were just happy with the payment. So there was a lot of discussion going on. And there was one group called Doc 14 workers, and they formulated a manifesto. Others created a created a publication. So they wrote about their situation and documented it and published it during the 100 days. So these are some examples of communication about art education. From here, I go to the question, what is art mediation for you? Which, I hope this is translated well anyway, but there's a translation as well of my talking. So why I'm doing the Art Educators talk was that I am really interested in knowledge that derives from practice, that comes from not only thinking about it, but experiencing it, doing it. And then I thought it's so interesting how my colleagues talk about their practice. Why shouldn't we do an interview? And this is why Alina, I think, asked me, and this is how we're going to do this. We're going to create knowledge as well after I finish talking and do this interview. And I think I just can show you some answers that are from art educators. For example, the question, what is your understanding of art education, is a question that I ask within the blog, The Art Educators Talk. And I always work with a set of questions, and not in one answer, there's kind of the same answer. So at the moment, there are more than 30 interviews on that web platform, and you have 30 definitions of what art education or art mediation is. And this is one definition I think is really interesting from Duygu Oers from 2021. And she focuses on the question, who owns the museum and who does she want to give the museum to? And so she focuses, for example, on people, quote, who have little to no exhibition experience or who cannot access these large institutions. So this is one focus of art education. And here is this one answer from Shusha Niederberger about the question, when do you think art education is successful? When do you think art education is complicated? And she answers, art mediation is successful when people go home inspired, including the art mediator. I think other answers you can just check on the web page as well. And I will just go shortly into the question why this is important. Why is sharing important in art mediation? And I think there are four really important points, which is, first of all, there's a visibility, which sometimes in institution is not the case. And so if you, if something is written, if you share and you organize in a way, this helps with visibility. It creates knowledge because not everything needs to be invented again and again and again. On the other hand, not everything is already written in books. So it's creating knowledge, it's sharing knowledge. And also this now is, for me, especially as a researcher, super interesting. There can also be theories generated from that practice. So let's go and share. We prepared something for you, which is a Padlet, and I will just shortly explain the Padlet, and I am sharing the link now, and you can click on that, and I show you what you can see. If you go to that, let me see. So this is the Padlet that you should see. Can you see it? Can you just confirm shortly? Okay, great. Now, my idea is to have a collective interview. So please look at the questions at the Padlet and choose one. you will have 10 minutes to answer it. You can either answer it in English or in Russian or maybe some other language. I show you the translation tools in a minute. And you can use the Padlet. You can give your answer by just clicking on this little plus, and then you can give your answer. Here, you click publish, and it appears here. You can then drag and drop it to the question. So this is what you can do. And then there's the question of authorship. So I'm going to publish this interview, of course, and I love to publish it on the Art Educators Talk blog. Therefore, the question is, do you want to be quoted or not? If you want to be quoted, you just edit your answer and put your name here. If you don't want to be quoted, then you just don't type your name and it will be anonymous. So how do we deal with language? And this is the other tool I'm going to show you in a moment, which is the translator. So you go to that address, which is not that, but it's in the chat, and you can just write your text here. And it's going to translate. And here you can choose the language. I hope that it's working for you as well. So you have to choose your language. Okay. Do you have questions so far?
Вы можете голосом спросить или написать вопрос в чат.
You're most welcome to ask your questions orally, unmuting yourselves. Or if you're silent, that means that there are no questions. And 10 minutes begin now, right? Okay, so 10 minutes starting. In 10 minutes, we will be back here and hopefully we will see your answers too. And we will discuss your answers.
Все разобрались, да, где ссылка на Padlet? Вот она.
Does everybody see the link? It's in the chat. Please let us know if you're confused. We will help you. Okay, this is it. Enjoy. Enjoy, please.
So the translation was not working, but I assume we can just start with the 10 minutes now. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Great. So I just share the Padlet with you and we can all turn off the cameras and write. And please choose your question now.
Друзья, мы все остаемся здесь, и Алина, и я, и можно задавать нам вопросы, если они появятся в процессе, там, по заполнению, например.
Дарья, можно задать? Да, все. Я просто хочу понять. Я правильно понимаю, что мы выбираем только один вопрос и на него отвечаем?
Да.
И,
Да.
то есть, в принципе, можно ответить и в комментарии или нет?
Нет, вы пишите на... Вот
So you're most welcome to answer one question only.
Да, и как она написала?
Please follow the link. Don't use the comment section, just the link. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Если вдруг у вас заготовлены заранее ответы, потому что мы
If you have prepared the answers in advance, because we mailed out the questions, if you have a few answers already, it would be cool if you copy-paste all of them,
как минимум один мы просим.
but at least one, please.
There is a question in the chat if the question why mediate art was removed from the list.
This is a good question. So either you can scroll on the Padlet, let me see if it's there. Yes, it's there, it's down there. You can add it here. Otherwise, if you miss a question, please go ahead and write it in. I shortened the list of questions in order to make it a little bit easier to access.
Дорогие друзья, я правильно понимаю, что вот
So, ladies and gentlemen, did I get it right that those who have already written their comments in Russian, could you use the automatic translation and translate your answers into English and then repost them? Because I cannot copy and paste your texts into the DeepL. So please, those who have already answered in Russian, please translate into Russian. Thank you.
Gila, Anastasia says that she wants to add a text, but for some reason the comment is not being added. So there is a bug or something.
Okay, this might happen. So maybe she just can put it in the chat and I put it on the Padlet. So I think for everyone, these were already 10 minutes. Thank you very much for the answers. I'm really impressed by how fast you are answering, or were answering nearly all the questions. That's amazing. And as Daria already said, it would be really cool to have as well Russian as English translations, which makes it maybe a little bit easier to discuss now. And I will just stop the screen sharing here so that we can get in a discussion, which we can have now for another 10 to 15 minutes. And it can be about the input or about maybe some questions you were encountering while answering questions. Please feel free to ask or share your experience as well.
Да, и еще обращаю ваше внимание, что...
One more point here is that when you have answered the question, your window with your answer appears at the very lower part of the page. So to put your note next to the question, you should drag it and drop under the question that you were answering, and you can't move any other person's contribution. Maybe some of you have not found your contributions at the very end, so please scroll down and left. We have several people who were not able to add their comments. We can start with these comments or questions, and we will start with you, and in this discussion, your contributions will play a role, and meanwhile, we will add them to the Padlet, if you wish, if you feel comfortable about this.
А давайте, Ксения, попробуем, может быть, с вас.
Let's try with Ksenia or Anastasia. I see that Anastasia has posted hers. Gila, can you move the others' notes? Can you move the others' contributions across the page?
Yes, I can do that.
А Ксения хотела начать говорить.
So Ksenia wanted to start talking. Ksenia, over to you, please. Yes, I have a question to precisely ask whether we are discussing our contribution or maybe others' contributions. Yes, if you feel like talking about some other participants' contribution, you may do this. Okay, I think I'll start with my answer, and then I'll switch off the video and try addressing somebody else's. I can speak either Russian or English, which is preferred. What's more comfortable for you? Okay, I'll try in English, but if I feel that I can't, I'll switch back to Russian.
For me, that mediation is a process of group and individual reflection. And contemporary art is some kind of a mirror of modernity. And I can understand, I can get a lot of information. I mean, not knowledge, because from my point of view, it's not knowledge. It's some kind of, как это сказать, ощущение, the sense of what happens now and how I can interpret it. And another thought that art mediation is some kind of space of safe dialogue where you can create multi-level communication, because it's communication between me and me, because it's some inner process. It's communication between me and group. It's communication between me and maybe one person. I mean, not a group. Sometimes it's like a group, like all people together. Sometimes I feel that, okay, I knew something about that person. And moreover, it's communication between me and piece of art and art in total. And sometimes even institution and exhibition and curators and artists, they're all involved in this big process of communication. It's more when we speak about the art mediation in the exhibition. But when we speak about art mediation and the method of art education, mostly for me, it's some kind of exploration, because normally, I don't know how it's in Europe, but in Russia, you normally wait for some kind of expert who is responsible for the situation, who is responsible for the sense, for interpretation. And people, it's very difficult for people to change the position. Like, I am a pupil and you are an expert, you are a teacher, and you know how, and I don't know how. It's a new sphere for me. And art mediation provocates people for another type of behavior, because in this type of behavior, you stop to wait for someone who knows, and you start to pay more attention to your own voice. And for example, I use the art mediation as a base of the course where we help people to where we work with meta competences. And in this case, nobody knows the answer. And because you live in this world where you need to create the answer. So in art mediation, you start to be the author. And for me, it's very important, because I think it's the best way of training meta competences and soft skills. When you change this position. And for people, normally, I understand that it's difficult for them at the beginning, but then they feel this taste, and I don't know in English, но, в общем, люди становятся более проявленными.
People become better exposed, open to each other, open to something new. They manifest themselves, and they become better seated in themselves. And I think that in other areas of activity, more convenient and familiar spheres, we become more bold, we start experimenting, communicating more freely, and I think we all lack this, regardless of museum or education or whatever. It's something that improves the quality of our life in any area.
Did the translation work this time? Is everything okay?
With the translation?
Yes, did it work? Okay.
Yes, the translation worked. So thank you very much for this definition, which is broad. And so is art education or art mediation. And yeah, since you already heard, I also have this difficulty of translating, for example, either education or mediation, because they bring different points in it. And this, what you were addressing with the experts on the one hand and the mediators on the other hand is something that I also experience a lot, and that also comes from an expectation from the public. So that there's a difference, for example, if the curator or if the mediator is going to do a guided tour, for example. This is something that is always, or that is that has to do something with hierarchies or things. And sometimes it has to do with in a way it's epistemologische Ungerechtigkeit. Well, it's an injustice that comes from knowledge or different expectations who we think knows something. And this happens in every part of societies, that sometimes we tend to listen rather to one group of people instead of listening to everyone and just acknowledging that everyone has a certain knowledge about things. And the interesting thing in art mediation is that there is this experience of those experts on the one hand. And on the other hand, as you just described, there is the possibility for everyone who is able to experience to add some informations or even knowledge, I think, really knowledge about artworks that wasn't there before. And this is a very broad field that in one hand, I think it's exciting, and on the one other hand, it's really astonishing that this all encounters in this little field of art mediation. And we have to deal with it. I don't think that we can solve it. That's my opinion.
Не знаю, должна ответить или мы идем дальше.
I don't know whether I should answer or we are moving forward. Well, if you have a very quick answer, we may continue discussing. Thank you for this comment. That's what I want to say. It's interesting that in the West, people have a similar experience. I used to think that they have a more horizontal teaching strategy, so to say.
I want just to answer quickly. Yes, there are, of course, also research and attempts and activities that go against this very much. And I think Carmen Mersch is one of the main figures from that critical arts mediation movement that at least, in some German spoken words are very strong or very known. And still there's the experience, if you're working in a museum, that is still happening. Even if there is this whole movement of critical art education. But I don't think that this is a reason to stop it. It's just on the contrary. I think we just should move on with this.
Дорогие товарищи, те, кто периодически включают
So,
камеру.
ladies and gentlemen, those who turn on your cameras for a short while, maybe you want to say something, but then you decline. Please don't be shy, don't resist yourselves. If I may, yes, please. Concerning education as such, I recently started reading a book which proposes this comparison. When we go shopping for groceries, we have a grocery list and we forget it. We start remembering it from the usual things, from what we usually buy. This and this drink, these and these vegetables. But the shopping list was made by somebody else, by your significant other or a friend, and you cannot recreate the list for them in full. And this experience that education provides, now I realize, I wanted to even say a joke about this. When there is an artist and a curator, they have their own background in education, they have obtained it, they have their own reading list. In the past, they read it all and they understand each other. When people come to a museum who are not so hungry, as I used in my comment, to learn so much. Maybe it's not that important for them to learn everything what this work means. And they can't understand the language of this artwork. They don't understand the curator's text. And if you have given curator tours, or if you have witnessed artists' own tours, these are two different things, two different feelings. And the mediator is a new kind of experience. And you will not be required to have the same education as the curator and the artist, but still you are coming with your own list, with your own shopping list, things that you know, things that are in your references. And you don't have any access to the reading list that the artist, the author, the curator had in mind. But now, through mediation, you have an opportunity. So you don't have the access to the shopping list, or maybe the recipe for which you need all these groceries. What I wanted to say is that when you come in with your own lived experience and your own education, you are within your own kind of a circle. And the interpretation that you get from the interaction with an artwork, you will never learn about another way unless you're lucky to have a guide who will allow you to take a look at a broader reading list behind it. That's what I was thinking. Thank you. Thank you. Please don't switch your camera off. We'll have comments and we'll maybe continue discussing.
I don't know exactly what to answer to this image because it seems to me very already very precise on the one hand, that of course there's always the notion of going back to the things we can remember that we know of. But I think what we should not forget is, on the other side, the curiosity. And the question is, who's able to afford this kind of curiosity to encounter something that leads into something not known. And in a way, I think art educators are helping on the way to certain uncertainties, in a way, to help to maybe only ask a question. And I think already being able to ask a question, for example, in front of an artwork, and even if the question is, why is this an artwork? I can do this as well, which is, yeah, I think you know that. But this is already a question, and questions lead usually to something that we don't know yet, but we know that there's something there. And I think, therefore, questions or asking questions can be a very good tool and can also be very helpful to empower. For example, the question, who owns a museum, can be a very powerful question. So this would be my comment rather than an answer.
А вас не слышно.
Да, я с вами согласен. Это так.
I completely agree with you. That is true. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Товарищи, если у кого-то есть желание озвучить свой вопрос или откомментировать те или другой вопрос, пожалуйста.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to comment on anything, you are most welcome.
Но я из последних сил сдерживаюсь и надеюсь, что кто-то из вас сейчас
I don't want to take the floor too much.
Алина, мы же после тебя сможем, если что?
Конечно, сможете.
Ну,
Конечно. Ладно, тогда
Ну,
давайте. Хорошо. Вот, спасибо за поддержку.
Okay, then I will begin. Thank you very much. I was very interested in the answer about art education as an educational tool. The answer is in Russian, so it would be great to read through this, to translate this answer for Gila. Art education is a capitalist tool which enables elites to hold the power in their hands. It is difficult to disagree with this on the one hand. On the other hand, I think we need to redefine these things. We have been discussing what art education is for quite a time. So maybe this is high time we discuss who holds this power in their hands. Gila, what do you think? What is art education? What do we talk about when we say art education? I think if we address this question to Gila, that could be, like an end to the discussion. Maybe we should pass the floor to other participants. It is very difficult to speak after an expert. I support Ksenia that art mediation is the space for manifestation, as Sarah Ahmed would say, space of appearance. And every one of us can appear and be a micro or macro expert in this.
Если Гила нас поддержит.
Gila, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, I can answer to that question, but as I understood from the translation, right, if someone else wants to answer to that question, he or she is really invited to do so. And I just wait for a short time, and maybe someone wants to answer.
I want to make a comment. I'm not sure that I can answer, but I have a comment because it's something I'm thinking about for maybe pandemic time. I think that it's like the process goes into two directions. And one direction is that it was mentioned in this comment, but another direction is that art mediation can level up our awareness, because it's some kind of because the questions that we need to answer, and then the generation of questions can level up the awareness. And maybe in this situation it's not как это сказать по-английски, это не так однозначно. Вот так бы я сказала.
I wouldn't say that that's so straightforward.
Переведут это.
Если
Я не помню это слово.
Straightforward, может быть. Ну и переводчики, я думаю, уже перевели Гиле.
Да, потому что когда мы становимся более осознанными, мы в любом случае...
Because when we are more aware, we can see more things and we become less controllable, so to speak.
По крайней мере, появляется шанс.
Тут еще есть комментарий в чате.
There is one more question for Alexei in the chat. Any education is a capitalist tool. I would even say that a political tool, rather.
Можно вопрос поставить к этому? Тут понятно, что любая система...
Can I ask a question here? Of course, any system cultivates that way of life that existed when it was created, since we are living in capitalism. That is capitalist in its essence. Sorry, I forgot what I wanted to say. I agree that there are two possible directions here, and we can start constructing it differently. and we're less prone to having it imposed on us. On the other hand, I'm reading now a book, Why Can't You Teach Art? And the author gives these examples. And here we're talking about art education in general, not art mediation per se. So the question he gives there is precisely that, art education. So they are, I think it's not that straightforward, but actually I also agree with the author that any constructed systems cultivate the broader system that they were created in. And I have a question actually. I have it formulated in German. We have been talking about the space of mediation, saying that it's a space of emergence, of appearance. My question is that we can use this space in a different way. We join the space, we share our positions, our opinions, and these opinions are very different in many cases. And in general, we notice that the values are not as rigid as they used to be. They are changing.
Он же даже свои вопросы выстраивает в какой-то логике, которая, он как-то ведет же определенную линию. Это же не хаотичный набор вопросов.
And the questions that we ask are not chaotic. There is a narrative in this question. So actually, my question is, how can we help the line, kind of? How can we define our position? How can we choose our question? So what is our position as mediators? Sorry, can you summarize the question? It's in the chat. You can find it under what questions you would like to ask our educators. How do mediators deal with the fluidity of values and of everything that's happening?
А можно, простите, уточнить про текучесть ценностей? Просто вот до этого я понимала, о чем речь, а с текучестью ценностей я поняла, что не понимаю. А мне кажется, это очень какая-то интересная...
Sorry, I don't really get. What is it? What do you mean by fluidity of values? As I observe processes and I observe how cultural institutions deal with the agenda, I see that... sorry, I had to get ready. Sorry, maybe I will formulate it better and I will write it in the chat. I think I'm not ready.
I think if that's okay, because I'm a little bit slow because of the amazing translation, which is really amazing to summarize so fast. But from what I hear about this fluidity, what I understand is the question of how to not, stand in a tradition of hierarchy while doing art mediation. So to not pass the hierarchies on while doing it. And I think this totally goes with the question of how elitist is art mediation. And I think from my point of view, yes, it is elitist because art is something very connected to the elite. And at the same time, if we leave the elite alone, What will they do? And to give an example, it depends on how we deal with it. For example, this is one thing I learned from Nora Sternfeld a long time ago, and I think this is still an amazing example. It depends on how you, for example, open a floor. If you say, welcome to this institution, on behalf of the institution, I welcome you and I will now give you an introduction about these artworks. So this would pass on the hierarchy of the institution when you're dealing with art, or when you're going to mediate art. And the other example Nora Sternfeld is giving is that, for example, if you say, hello, I am Gila Kolb, and today I'm going to walk with you through a museum, and actually I'm not sure about every artwork if I can make sense to it, but let's just go in and try. So I don't know if this example translates in your practice, because I don't know too much about art mediation in Russia at the moment. But I think this idea could maybe help you to think about how to translate, how to pass on things, or how to not pass on things. And what would happen if you would not pass on all the knowledge in a way that shows that you are an expert.
Позвольте, я здесь включусь и немножко...
I might like to add a comment about the answer that Zina gave us. I liked one thing about her answer. It seems important to me that the question makes obvious the difference in our understanding of art education, because Zina said that education is about educating, professional education, teaching artistic practices, knowledge and skills, while Ksenia means all practices including mediation and dialogue when she talks about art education. These are two different views on the word, and here I'm getting back to what Alina asked. What is your understanding? What did you put into this question? We wanted to make visible those differences in understanding of art education. We are waiting for questions to be translated? No?
Was this question for me, or was it for the group?
Yeah,
it was for the
question for you, because actually at the end I was asking if whether do you know what was the idea behind you asking this question to us? I mean, did you expect all these different misunderstandings to become visible through answering to this question from the group? I mean,
and once again, this difference, right, between art mediation and art education.
Is it really different?
Is it really?
Is there really a difference?
Yes and no. So I think there's a translation problem. From some German-spoken countries, for example, I was working at a MA program which just called itself MA Art Education in English, although there's a German term for it. And in Germany, there are different terms of, the one is Vermittlung, which rather translates to mediation, and there's Erziehung, which rather relates to education. And the impulse that is in it is either some idea of let's call it like a connection, and somebody jumps between gaps. This is rather the mediation part, and the education part has rather the hierarchy in it. So that's a first. So of course, rather mediation than education. I still think that there is a hierarchy. So why not naming it? And still, while doing it differently or making it transparent. So I would not do art education with starting, I know more than you, and this is why I do it. Obviously, because this won't be a good conversation, maybe. On the other hand, I would also not trying to conceal or that I might know more. But instead, I think the question is how do we communicate with each other and how to create an open space. And this is something you can think about. Yeah, there are several methods. And I think one is, for example, this Padlet, which everyone could use and click into. And we are all experts in what we're doing. So then we can choose if we want to be seen or named or not named, or there's a possibility to answer. And this kind of situation can be created as well in analog situations when we deal in front of an artwork or several artworks. So I don't know if the answers, so my answer would be I would rather use art education instead of art mediation, but there is a whole discourse about it, and a very German discourse about it, because in the term Vermittlung, mediation is also some kind of connection. That's one specific language part that also is in falling in love, in verlieben, which has something very uncontrollable. And so maybe there is also this moment of a flash that is happening when you encounter art. And this would be an argument for art mediation.
Yes, and in Zina's question, we have an additional comment here that might lead us to additional discussion. I'll read it aloud. The question to the one who asked the question: what do they mean? A school or a museum? It's rather comment. What do you mean? And I would add an additional question. Is there something in common between a school and a museum? And how we could call the common element? Is it mediation or is it education? I think that it's not just about common things. It's more about their differences. Why do we separate them? Or have we already learned to separate them while they're one and the same, in fact? Well, there are formal things in language. They can talk about enlightenment and education. Enlightenment is a meeting. It doesn't have to be systematic, while education is more about systems, at least in our language. Of course, now we use the word education everywhere, or entertainment, because we're not using enlightenment in our language. But I think the difference might be about how systematic it is. And then the question is, what can be called education? What can be called enlightenment? Yes, this is another good word here. Another good word for this discussion. Yes, I do also use the word enlightenment. I don't think it's a bad word, but of course it does have this connotation of hierarchy as well. And Gila has already highlighted. We want to depart from it, and then we use mediation. Really? Excuse me, if I may, I like the word study even more, or research, because when we exchange meanings, when we exchange ideas, we are kind of researching, we're not moving to a given endpoint. And I have a comment to Zina. I had mediation yesterday, and we were looking at various ages: Renaissance, modernism, and postmodernism. And in the end, we look at 3 artworks to the same subject matter. And when we finished considering them, I made some kind of a summary or conclusion. I did it by collecting ideas from the participants, making a portrait of the age using words they offered, but using those suggestions that correlated with the systemic knowledge about this. And I couldn't know beforehand what answers I'd get and what kind of a portrait of the age would be collected, what kind of a puzzle would be collected. And of course, some of this information was more personal, not just about the age in question. And of course, I had my own attitude towards it. I was building these portraits, but I was not refuting their utterances, their attitudes that became part of mediation. And I think the answer can lie here. Why am I mediating? In some cases, I might want to involve people in communication. In other cases, I want to let them feel like artists. In other cases, I want to give them an idea of an age in the art history. And depending on this attitude, I am collecting their opinions. I don't have to direct them beforehand. I thought this could be an important observation here. Thank you. Thank you, Ksenia. I think Ksenia is just emphasizing this transcendency of a mediator when you are facing many attitudes that might be different, left to right, north to south. They are all well-founded, and you have to transcend them and bring them together and draw a line between them. How do you do this? Do you do it as a kind of a summary or resume, or do you bring in a personal attitude? It was interesting to hear what you said. You were making a resume of what they said, but you only picked something that correlates with the, so to say, official knowledge of art history. It's a kind of a way to renounce responsibility in a way. But I'm interested in this when you have 100 people, 100 opinions, but how do you preserve yourself, your own attitude? Or do you reassemble yourself each time? I think I don't have an issue with having my own attitude, which doesn't mean that others will inherit my attitude through mediation. Even when I make a summary that correlates with the official knowledge, there is still open space for dialogue, and each individual comes out of this with their own takeaway, with their own thoughts, not mine, not necessarily mine. I think it's a question of your inner attitude, your inner stability, and the logic that you follow internally, and this logic could be different case by case, might be informing, might be playing a game according to given rules. I think that a mediator always has to define the rules of the game for themselves. I may speak longer for this, but I think that's it from me to this particular subject. Well, I have 2 questions here, and I think we have something like this in the chat, but maybe Gila, you would like to give a comment to what Ksenia and Zina have discussed.
I think it is a discussion of its own to the question of what really stays in the heads of those who are taking part in an art mediation or art education. And I think what stays is something we can't really control. This is something that is similar between school and museum, because the the message is always defined by the receiver, not by the one who's sending it. So we don't know that, but we can offer possibilities. And I think it was just amazing to hear also about the question of education and enlightening, which is which is a really interesting discussion if it comes to digitality, because there's still the idea of a subject and an object, so that we have this kind of free will of opinions and forming opinions, which especially with things like algorithms coming with, for example, search engines as, in the internet, they are forming our opinions as well without really letting us know about it, obviously. So this question is something that needs to be discussed in another way with the upcoming digital tools. But this would be a totally different talk, I think. But I think it's amazing how, in how many levels you are discussing and sharing your opinions here, and this is actually a gift, and I'm learning a lot here.
Мне кажется, еще важный вопрос, который прозвучал, как будто чуть-чуть
Another important question that we raised, I think in passing, is the question about the responsibility of mediator. What responsibilities do mediators have? And they are responsible to who? And this is related to the question, on whose behalf do they speak? This is a very important question which is raised quite often on the one hand, but I haven't heard like a final answer. So this is a question about the position, about agency, on whose behalf mediators speak, and are they responsible? If they are accountable or responsible, then who are they accountable to? Another question is about education. This is the issue that has been raised a few times in the chat. We could also discuss this. Why did education become a kind of a prohibited topic? In Russian, we call ourselves educators, although the more classical word for such programs in Russian is something like enlightenment in English. So maybe somebody would like to answer one of these two questions. My comment is very short. I just meant the situation with the laws that we have. Maybe we need to clarify it. It seems like we know that we're talking about, but Gila doesn't for sure. We have a new question. We have a new law on educational practices, and one can get imprisoned for educational practices if they are not confirmed by the government. So even in our language, we start avoiding some things to be on the safe side.
Я хотела бы тоже добавить небольшой комментарий, но по поводу закона о просвещении, вот насколько я его...
I also wanted to add a short comment. As for the law on educational practices, art mediators are not subject to it. Art mediators are not education per se. Art mediators, of course, do share information at exhibitions, at different kinds of events they take part in, but it is not the same as even a tour guide sharing information. Mediator's goal is very different. As for education, mediators do perform this function, maybe not as the law defines it, but still, people are very rarely interested in these kinds of biographical narratives, like they were born there, this is where they died. I follow tour guides now just to see how the guided tours are perceived. And you can see people are bored if you just share information endlessly with them. If you start engaging them in a conversation, sharing opinions, then they follow the information much better. And I think that art mediators still do provide education. Maybe it's not formal education, but rather getting the person interested, engaging a person. And as for whether a mediator has to share the curatorial concept or the concept of the institution they work in, that's a question of loyalty, I believe. There are independent experts. This is one thing, but if you represent a museum, of course, you can also share your own opinion. And you're also welcome to say your take on the question and then ask people to engage too. This could be a professional conversation. So both, I think a mediator can share their opinion and they can also encourage others to share theirs. Thank you very much for your comment. Gila, if you have any comments on that, or if you would like to answer the questions voiced.
I don't know if I have an answer, because I think that there is not one answer. Mm-hmm. And what I heard about responsibility, I think this is an important part. So yes, we can't control what is happening in the heads. We can't just, we don't know that. But we are responsible for how open the rooms are. And this is something that the study I presented shortly also showed, that on the one hand, opening a stage or a dialogue helps people to get involved, but also sometimes make hierarchies visible, because there are some who are rather used to talk and others who are not. And I don't think that there's a solution, like one solution for it. But I think we have to be, or art educators should, in my opinion, be aware of this and try to have it in mind when opening a dialogue, which is, just the way we are discussing here. Some are participating, others are listening, and both is totally fine, because some are used to this tool or to this scenery, others are not. And the question is how to open the space on the one hand, and how to enable a moment of sharing and creating maybe knowledge together. And how far can we go in each moment? And I don't think that there's some kind of a rule or a set or something. It's rather a situation that to deal and read with.
У Оксаны Винокуровой есть вариант ответа.
Oksana Vinokurova has an answer or a comment that we can read out. I think yet again, over this course of workshops, we are facing the questions of terminology, of the right terms, and now we're discussing how to translate the word education and what options to choose for education. We have words mediation, pedagogues, and facilitators. Oksana says pedagogical staff, pedagogues are doing guided tours, and as for mediation, facilitators do that. Again, teachers and pedagogues are about knowledge and hierarchy, and mediators are about thinking and horizontality. Another opinion from Oksana, mediator is accountable for the processes, and as for the meanings, the participants do put these meanings in. But professional pedagogues, although some people think that this science does not exist, do not want to pass on the whole responsibility to their students. So this is the ultimate question of who is responsible for the meanings and senses and the knowledge that arises in this open field. Is it shared accountability? Or is it the responsibility of the mediator?
Всегда супер важно было снять все-таки дихотомию между медиацией и образованием. Я как бы пытаюсь в течение 7 лет это сделать, но я понимаю, что я не сильно преуспела, видимо, до сих пор.
I'm still struggling with this.
И внутри такого профессионального сообщества, потому что все-таки до сих пор все стремятся, большинство коллег стремятся разделять эти две области.
I think that our colleagues mainly try to separate these two areas, teaching, education, and mediation and facilitation, although I think that it is very hard to draw this line. Mediators do also have information and they share information, as well as teachers. They facilitate conversations. So there is a lot of overlap. Mediators know just as much as professional tour guides do, but the method of conversation is different for them. So for me,
в том числе и публикация книги, да, Кармен Мёрш, это, мне кажется, во многом
this is what I see in Carmen Mörsch's book. This is about how these fields, these areas can merge.
I have a question. Why is it important to have this kind of mediator, educator, facilitator? I understand that it's important to understand what you're doing and to know where you're standing when you're speaking, so from where you're speaking. But I'm not sure if I could ever tell if someone in school is rather acting as a teacher, as you describe it, or as a facilitator or a mediator. And this is when I was listening and I was thinking, is it important to have this kind of definition, or is it rather important to know I am a mediator slash educator slash researcher because I want to open up institutions, because I want to enable people to participate in discourses that they might have already a relation to, but maybe not. So, or sometimes it's also enabling the experience of the moment that there's more than one opinion, and that's okay. So these can be, and I don't know if this situation, for example, this experience, there's more than one opinion, and that is fine. If this situation is educational or mediation, I don't know. But I know one thing, and this is that it's an important experience that I want people to have. Maybe I sound a little bit idealistic here, but so this is, So why is it important?
Actually, I totally agree with you, Gila. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. You just put it much better than maybe me put it. for me, there's no difference. I mean, it's a strange terminological play, but the question is, what's your position exactly?
I might be the one who sees the difference and who thinks that the difference is important. I am that person.
Oh, then please argue.
I think that, я, наверное, лучше по-русски. Я думаю, что разница очень важна, потому что разница...
I think that the difference is important because it depends on what position you take in an institution. What you call yourself is related to what power you have. And in Russia, for example, calling yourself a mediator is politically correct in a way. It's better than calling oneself an educator. Maybe earlier it was different. Me, as a person who has been working in education for my whole life, at some point I understood that politically correct title for me would be mediator because it opens some space for action and work. So I think that I approach naming from the point of view of conditions that this name and opens. So maybe I'm Marxist in that. So this event of calling yourself in a way is crucially important at every point of time. So when you call an art mediator now, you're building yourself into an art context and some context of existence.
Вот именно для российского контекста это важно, то, что ты говоришь, потому что, мне кажется, как раз в Западе...
Yeah, maybe this is especially important for the Russian context. I think that in the Western context, it is not that manifested. So our Western colleagues very often do not understand the essence of our terminological disputes and debates. Maybe Gila can comment on that, by the way.
Вот правильно понимаю, что вы примерно о том, что мы чаще отвечаем на вопрос «кто я?».
A short comment. Very often it's about us answering the question who we are, while in the West people are mainly saying what they're actually doing. I might be wrong, but it seems that there is some reason for this. I didn't get your comment actually, but I think that I don't agree, if I got you right. I think that when we're talking about a specific naming, a specific badge, this influences our practice. This naming influences the way we are experienced. We are seen politically within the society, within an institutional system. I might be wrong. Oh. I'm sorry, this might be a very narrow example, but I now realize that I take part in lots of seminars and conferences and educational events that have to do with the subject of mediation, but I seem to be missing altogether everything that is branded, so to say, as museum education. I'm outside of this community. It is nice, they've got great experts and professionals, and I realize that they are discussing basically the same things as we, but they're using other words, and it turns out to be two different worlds within the Russian community. And I think it's strange. So many years have passed, but we're still living in a separate situation. I can comment here. I'm currently both studying and practicing in very conservative museums, the Pushkin Fine Arts Museum and the Tsaritsino Palace, and I see that museums are very traditional and very conservative in our country, and they have very rigid formats for interacting with visitors. And a mediator is a kind of a breath of fresh air, especially in the traditional museums, because they are the only people to actually interact with people, to communicate with them. When it comes to museum education, as it's labeled here, I got the same comment from people at Tsaritsino, because they say, we have been doing similar things all the time, but it was called museum education, museum pedagogics. My pathway is such that I came to Moscow as an adult and I grew up in a smaller town. And now I see that in traditional museums, we have children's programs and adult programs. And in children's programs, they have more interactive communications. But for adults, it's just rigid tours where people are standing around silently and asking questions in the end. And interaction with the tour guide is not provided for, even if the guide is good. It's just how museums work in our country. Of course, other countries have other formats, and we can have this misunderstanding of terms, but I think that in several years, mediation will take its place, and there will be less of misunderstanding. I see that people are interested, people want to talk, it's visible. I think I'd like to ask Gila now, what are you thinking? Is really mediation so widespread in the West, in the Western countries, in the English-speaking countries, in German-speaking countries, and the word education, or the German equivalent, is going off to the background and is being used less commonly when it comes to educational practices in museums?
I think that these discourses are very related to local conditions. So it is different, for example, in Germany and in Switzerland. For example, there's a study program called Art Education, and there are people who would go to school also and teach, would also study with people who go to a museum or some other cultural institution. And in Germany, these are two very different types, and people would not even meet when they're studying each program. So there's less of a dialogue. And for example, I studied art education to become a teacher. And then I just learned that I could not deal with just transporting the hierarchy. So I got very interested in art mediation, because there were the critical, the political, the action and the activism, and also the anti-racist action. And so for me, this was like a real step aside. And now, having seen or worked in both fields, and currently I'm researching again in the didactics of art, which is now again going back to school on the one hand. And I think these discourses are related, and they have more in common than some might think. Or sometimes I feel like there's this discourse and this discourse, and I read the books and I'm like, yeah, but it would be really good to talk to each other, because the discussion would be very fruitful. And this is also happening. So this is a very special, as you can see, there's already between Germany and Switzerland and then Austria and so on, very different practices and very different understandings. And what I understand now from your discussion is that what Alina and also Ekaterina pointed out, which I think is really important, that if the word helps to gain a certain freedom or a certain room to act, then of course it's important. And then it's a tool. So yeah, that's what I think about it. And so yes, I don't know if I can speak for the West, but I don't know. But yes, there is a discussion, and yes, there are, for example, very different situations, because people in museums are rather there in their free time. People in schools usually not. They have to. otherwise the police comes and gets them out of their homes and gets them into the school, for example, if they are in a certain age. So yes, there is a difference in the public and also in the how voluntarily they are there. And this becomes particularly interesting when there are schools going in museums. This is a special situation.
I think I managed to notice all the comments that we got. So if we have any last remarks, then it's time to ask them, because we have to wrap up this session and the series as a whole. If I may, a very brief comment. Yes, please. I wanted to add another joking dimension here. I have some little experience in volunteering and in giving tours, and I'm not a teacher and not an educator. And I was really interested in learning more about these practices. And I'd like to say thank you for using words like openness. I think in many people there is no realizing of what they want, that they really want to open, to join this discourse, and you have to kind of press them in the right button to help them enter this discourse. The artist has made an artwork, but they're now silent, they're not taking part in the communication. The artwork is just hanging there, and for many people it might remain undiscovered. And I think you are doing this in a more professional manner, so I'd like to thank you for engaging with this, for creating tools, for meeting here. And when it comes to my joke, it's the following. I once visited a lecture by an artist. It was a darkened room. They were showing slides on the screen. It was quite stuffy and silent. The pictures were changing on the screen, and the artist was saying just one word: this is a lighthouse, this is a bird, and so on. And this stuffy and silent room, without any dialogues, if there are no tools like what you have described, then it will always remain this stuffy and dark and just a lighthouse, a bird, and that's it. Maybe it's hard to translate, but that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thanks. Could you introduce yourself, because I can see only your surname on the screen. I'm joining from my other computer, actually. I used the ls Vlad Nezabudkin in one of the answers on the Padlet. That's the name. Thank you, Vlad. Thank you. And as you see, we were all discussing basically the first question all this time. And there are a few questions remaining, but I think we have built interesting connections. For example, to what degree art mediation can open a new area of practice, and I think Alina touched upon this. Thank you. I'd like to thank all the participants for their answers, and I'd like to remind them that for 2 days we will still be waiting for their comments or additions or changes and edits to what they wrote. So if you wish, you can edit your contributions. It will be available for 2 days, and then Gila will finalize it and will start making her paper based on these answers and thoughts. It was more like a thought session. If somebody wants to make a translation of their own and not use the automatic tool, please do it within the 2 days as well, because I don't see that all the answers are translated. We can do it ourselves, but this empowers you more if you can do it yourselves. right. The chat is asking to repost the link to the Padlet. And I'm doing it. Or Gila, if you may, yeah.
Спасибо. Ну что, неужели мы прощаемся?
Thanks. So, is it already time to say goodbye? We only got 5 minutes left and we have to wrap up the series. Maybe some closing words from Gila on tonight's workshop, and then we'll have a final word on the whole series. Please.
Well, the only thing I can say is thank you very much for sharing and participating. And I have to say I was really excited about meeting you, about listening and reading your answers. And certainly I will need to check the Padlet and to read it, to really read it, and to maybe help with the help from people or other tools to understand it. And yeah, thank you for your openness and for your contribution to this interview with the Art Educators talk. And again, thanks to the organizers for inviting me, and thank you for the moderation and the amazing simultaneous translation. I'm totally impressed by this. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Мне кажется, пора назвать имена наших переводчиков, потому что мы всегда благодарим переводчиков.
Okay, I think we have to name our interpreters now, because we normally just say bluntly thank you, but they have been with us for the whole month and they never let us down. Marina, what are their names? Yeah, of course. Good evening, everyone, once again. Nadezhda Lebedeva and Igor Mokin have been our interpreters today. Leah Eberlidze has also joined us. So I would say that on behalf of Garage and myself, thank you to all participants. All the meetings are recorded both in English and in Russian. You're most welcome to rewatch them. We will add time codes soon, so please share them. Thank you very much to Pro Helvetia Foundation. Alina. This is very important that we are not saying goodbye. Very soon the book will be published in English. Please follow our announcement, and in February we'll continue the cycle. So please don't lose the contact, and we will invest into it too. Thank you very much, Alina. If that's okay with you, then I will just let you know that for me and for the Ural Biennial, that was a symbolic gesture, symbolic act, because in 2015, two institutions, after Manifesta 10, launched Art Mediation. That was the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art. 7 years has passed since then. Quite a big term, and we joined efforts to discuss together with you what has been happening in art mediation in Russia over these years. And I think the series of workshops show that the Russian educational community is ready to engage in a dialogue on mediation professionally on a completely different level. And we really can see that the geography and the composition of participants of these seminars testifies that there is a huge request for discussing these things together. Talk about meanings, the mechanics, the tools of our work.
Делиться опытом и вырабатывать какие-то совместные взгляды, совместные решения. И
We need to work out our shared knowledge, shared opinions, and this is great that we are ready to see each other. We are ready to see similarities in our approaches and see differences, notice these differences, discuss these differences, and together resolve the issues. And pretty much as Marina has said, this is not over. This could be the beginning of a further dialogue, of a further discussion between representatives of different institutions on what art mediation is in Russia, mediation in art in Russia. The workshop that we will have in December, and the publication of the book will be a kind of a next step for building communication, professional communication. So let's stay in touch. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alina, very much for your beautiful programming. That was extremely fruitful and extremely productive for me personally, and I think for all participants. And thanks a lot to all our partners that supported us, the Presidential Grant Foundation, Pro Helvetia, and thanks a lot to all our speakers. Thank you very much. Actually, I have just a couple of words. Marina and Daria, I think, have already summarized our approach aptly. First, I want to unravel myself. I entered the series of workshops egoistically. As when I launched this collaboration, when I entered into this collaboration thinking of a program, I was quite egoistic in my intentions. I wanted personally to sort out what mediation is. I wanted to win over all the devils. Actually, we all discuss education, but we do differentiate between these terms, education, mediation, and my take was, why do we need to differentiate these terms? And I always connected the introduction to mediation in Russia with manifesto. So I thought that maybe this word was imposed on the cultural scene by an international biennale that introduced this word in the discourse in Russia. Before that, we were doing museum educational projects. And very often we used the methods that we call now art mediation. And I wanted to explain this change of terms. Why did we start calling mediation art education? I think we still have a lot of ground for further discussion, and we will keep working with these questions in February. But I wanted to share that I'm calm down. All my criticism of art mediation is smoothed. Actually, it was smoothed out on the second workshop when we were discussing. A reader, I think it was Sasha, who said that mediation for him is everything. Not just an art of interaction, but also the way of building relationships between people from different institutions. That's also the reason for a shared space, actually. And I understood and I found the reason for myself to stay there. Mediation for me is about finding my own position, and we talked about it today. This is the way to articulate one's own position, the way and the reason to be in this unbalanced state, where you can articulate your own position in this multi-vector field. But for this series of workshops, I would never have had this understanding, so I'm very happy that I learned so much. For me, it was truly an educational endeavor, so I want to express my gratitude to everyone, Marina and Dasha. Thank you all. Thank you all. And see you again soon.
Спасибо и до свидания. Всем до новых встреч.
See you soon.